Informed Choice Radio, episode 327 with Herman Brodie, author of The Trust Mandate.
Live from Sundial House Studios, this is Informed Choice Radio. Want to make the most of your money and your life? You've come to the right place. Now, here's your host, Martin Bamford.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Informed Choice Radio. Who do you trust and why do you trust them? These are important questions, especially when money is involved. My guest on the podcast today is co-author of a new book called The Trust Mandate. Herman Brodie spent over a decade in investment banking roles in London, Paris and in Frankfurt. In 2000, he co-founded his first company, Cognitrend, a consultancy to advise financial institutions on the utilization of behavioral finance research. He has pursued this goal since 2013 as Managing Director of Prospector Limited. Herman is co-author and lecturer of A Practical History of Financial Markets, a course aimed at investment professionals. It's developed for the Edinburgh Business School's MBA programme, and he's also penned numerous articles on behavioural finance. In The Trust Mandate, Herman seeks to answer an essential question. Why is it that an investment client selects or an investment consultant recommends one asset manager over another when the two are, on paper at least, very similar? In our conversation today, we get stuck into the science of trust. Understanding these concepts is essential for investors who want to make the best possible decisions with their money and understand why they place their trust in some investment managers but not in others. You can find the show notes and useful links for this episode at icradio.co.uk/327. That's icradio.co.uk/327. Here's my conversation with Herman Brodie, author of The Trust Mandate, in episode 327 of Informed Choice Radio. Well, welcome back to Informed Choice Radio. I'm delighted to welcome today Herman Brodie. Herman is a co-author of a new book called The Trust Mandate, which we'll be talking about today. So, Herman, could you start by telling us a bit about yourself and about your work in the field of behavioral finance?
Well, behavioral finance, as you probably know already, it's like a synthesis of economics or finance and the social sciences, principally psychology. We bring those two things together in order to be able to make, more useful economic predictions, so improve our decision making and to improve our economic outcomes. And I guess one could really say that I've been interested in behavioral finance since the beginning of my professional career. I mean, I have a background in economics and in finance, and I graduated in the summer of 1987. And I started work immediately in London for a commodity trading company. And a couple of weeks into the job, the global financial markets crashed. And so I quickly recognized that things are not going to be working in the real world in the same way that the economic models that I'd studied in university had predicted. And since then, basically, I've been very adept at the field of behavioral finance, leaving the investment banking industry in 2000 to create a company, a consultancy company to focus on behavioral finance and advising in financial industry firms into the use and the exploitation of this discipline. And since 2013, I created Prospector Limited, which is really, it's a network of academics in the social sciences and industry practitioners who coalesce around specific projects. And what we try and do is to find behavioral solutions to industry-specific challenges and to compile knowledge and to disseminate that knowledge.
And I think it's fair to say that behavioral finance is really coming of age at the moment. Obviously, Professor Richard Thaler received a Nobel Prize recently, so it's hit the headlines a lot. Do you think it is becoming a real mainstream approach now?
Absolutely. I mean, these days, it's impossible to do an MBA course at any serious university without at least having one module on behavioral finance. It's becoming a natural part of economics these days.
Now, we're talking about your new book. It's co-authored with Klaus Harnick. It's called The Trust Mandate. Can you tell us a bit about the book and how that collaboration with Klaus came about?
Well, the Trust Mandate came about is a research that we did together to answer a question. In fact, it was a question that was asked to me by one of my clients, a question that I didn't know the answer to. In fact, I was even embarrassed that after, practically 30 years in the service industry for professional investors, asset managers, private wealth managers, that I'd not even thought seriously about this question. It is the question, the ultimate question, namely, why is it that a client chooses you to do this job, to be their asset manager, wealth manager, financial advisor, banker, broker? Why does the client choose you instead of somebody else? Or probably more importantly, why does the client sometimes choose somebody else and not you? Now, of course, if the client does not hire you, then nothing else really matters, does it? And so this is the most important question. A client asked me this because he said to me, well, our products are vastly superior to those of our competitors, yet our competitors still win mandates. Why is that the case? And I didn't really know that answer. So I started looking firstly in the historical data about the drivers of asset flows, looking at the statistics, who gets money to manage and who doesn't, and what are the characteristics of those firms, of those managers that seem to be associated with, asset inflows and outflows. And it came very quickly to the conclusion that performance, in fact, doesn't explain a great deal. So we like to think in this industry that, it's all about, who has the best performance and who is the best qualified, who has the most experience and things like this. Those are the factors that ought to be driving those flows, driving those decisions. But in fact, those factors don't seem to explain a great deal. In fact, a great deal was very much associated with the client's perception of the one who's offering the service. They wanted to know what's making those people tick. What are their guiding principles? So they were going into the characteristics of the person offering the service. So it was very much an emotional thing. It was very much associated with psychology. And Klaus Haunach is one of those academics who's very much focused in that domain. And so I invited him to join into this research project, and we started looking at the psychological drivers. And the conclusion to that research is what we've put into this new book, The Trust Mandate.
So trust is a difficult word to define sometimes. How would you define it? What factors are involved? And why do you think that trust is so often missing in business relationships? I guess we tend to focus often on things like price and performance and leave out those softer aspects like trust.
Yeah. Trust is basically an impression that we have about somebody else. So when we meet somebody for the first time, for example, we form an impression about them. Now, you might be surprised to learn that that impression is not on a single dimension. We don't see somebody as good versus bad on a single dimension. In fact, when we form an impression of somebody, we do it automatically on two dimensions, two independent dimensions. Now, the first of those dimensions is our impression of the other person's intentions towards us. Now, is this person going to be our friend, or are they going to exploit us selfishly? Are they going to have our best interests at heart, my best interests at heart, or do they have their own selfish interests at heart? So we make a judgment about somebody else's intentions towards us. Now, after that judgment is reached, we make a second judgment almost immediately about what our perception of the person's ability to act on those intentions. So we make a judgment about their skills, their resources, their abilities, their competence. Now, when there is a backdrop of risk, of vulnerability, those two judgments combine. And if that other person scores highly on those two domains, when there is a risky environment, then we will be willing to put our fate in their hands. So we will be ready to trust those people. So what it is whenever there is a backdrop of risk or vulnerability, if we perceive somebody as having our best interests at heart and having the ability to act on those interests, that is the definition of trust.
And for both of those factors, is it a sort of binary choice, or is it a scale where we believe?
It's a scale. So we see people as having, let's put it on a scale of 1 to 5, if you like. If they score very highly on both of those dimensions, then when a risky choice comes along, we will entrust them to make that choice for us, or to help us to make that choice.
And you were saying we're making those decisions, those impressions very quickly. So how do first impressions make a big impact when it comes to building interpersonal trust? And how do we make better first impressions?
The first impressions are actually quite invaluable. Those judgments are made non-consciously, so we're not even aware that we're making those judgments. And very often it takes place in a fraction of a second. So the first millisecond we meet somebody, we can already decide whether that person is likely to be our friend. Now, the way that it works is typically what we're looking for is some kind of family resemblance. Now, this does not necessarily mean that they look like me or talk like me or have similar accents to me, but think about family in the broadest possible sense. So the way somebody looks and talks, of course, plays an important role. Then things like their name. And if we have those things, we take some cues from the environment, the sights, the sounds, the smells, temperature. All of these things have an effect in our minds whereby it doesn't create trust, but it creates associations in the brain that the brain then links to this state of trust. So those first impressions, they have the impact of either they clear the path towards this state of trust, or they create obstacles for us. And so one of the things the book goes into is precisely those first impressions, the kind of things that the brain non-consciously will look for in another person that it will likely associate with this state of trust.
So assuming I'm an asset manager, which I am some of the time, and I'm meeting a client for the first time, how can I make sure I give a great first impression and build a really trusted relationship, given that happens, as you say, in milliseconds, it happens so quickly?
So those associations are not trust. It's just the starting point, these associations in the brain. Now, let's give you a very simple example. Let's say that I tell you, we're going to meet somebody. We're going to meet somebody today. You're going to like this person. His name's John. You'll like him. He's a very warm and friendly chap. Now, whether you're aware of it or not, chances are you'll come out of that meeting perceiving John as being warmer and friendlier than had I never said those words.
Okay.
Now, in a certain sense, you've created an association in the brain, which the brain automatically links to this state of trust. So you start to think that this could be somebody who I will be able to trust. And once you've started making those associations, remarkably, the brain finds it a lot easier to find many other associations, which helps to pave the way towards this state of trust. Now, you might well say, well, that's a bit of cheating. There's a bit of manipulation there if you say something like that. But the fact is, it doesn't matter what I say, the brain will always make some judgment about it. So if John just says hello to you, that brain will make some association to do with trust. If John doesn't say anything, or I don't say anything, the brain will interpret the silence in terms of its associations to the state of trust. So every cue in that environment, in some way or another, the brain associates with this state of trust. So it's completely unavoidable. So what I very much focus on in the book is to at least inform people of the things which do not necessarily work or will hurt you. At least one should try and avoid those things that the brain associates with the state of distrust.
So it sounds like I need to get my assistant in the future to welcome new clients into the office and say a few nice things about me before they actually meet me, and that will sort of create that association hopefully
Absolutely.
in the first meeting.
And you'd be surprised the things that are very much associated with the state of trust. If the client has a warm drink in their hands, they are more likely to trust you. If the client can have the smell of lavender in his nostrils, they're more likely to trust you. All of these things contribute to this association, which clears the way towards the state of trust. It doesn't create trust. It just makes the likelihood that a trusting relationship is established more easy.
So once that way has been paved for a trusted relationship and establishing a trusted relationship, what are the factors that tend to create those longer term trusted relationships? This is the slow stuff, I guess, rather than the first impression.
This is the slow stuff. I guess the big one here is that once comes back again to this family resemblance. It has to do with a set of shared values. So if you share the same values as your client, then it's more likely that a long-lasting trusting relationship develops. Now, what are those values that could be shared? Well, they're multiple. Interest in, shared interest in sports, or shared interest in the arts or cultural factors, or politics or religion, or there's countless values that you and your client could possibly share. And when you have this basis of shared values and you start your conversations in this base of shared values, communication is far better. So you're able to be much more communicative, much more persuasive in your arguments. And this family resemblance that people are constantly looking for, this is what it boils down to. Families have a set of shared values. And as a consequence, people perceive their family members as having their interests at heart, which means the families have positive intentions towards each other. And this is what drives those long-lasting, trusting relationships. And this is the reason why those trusting relationships can work just on the basis of, a handshake. Agreements can be made on the basis of a handshake, because families are essentially the essential governance mechanism, if you like. This is our innate governance mechanism. And family members have sanctions at their disposals that, other people don't have. Things like shaming. These are sanctions which drive governance within family relationships. So the key driver to long-lasting, trusting relationships is precisely those shared values.
Where's the trade-off then between competence and warmth, particularly in financial services? I've met lots of people who are friendly people, very warm individuals, but not necessarily technically competent, and then vice versa. Of course, you can be both as well. But is there a trade-off between those two attributes?
Yeah, when you think about warmth, you should rather think about it as, positive intentions. So in the book, we talk about warmth and competence because this is the way that it's referred to in the academic literature. So anybody who wants to read further, has, valid reference points. But what we're talking about in this trade-off is between positive intentions and high levels of competence. Now, what we've discovered is that there is very much a trade-off between the two. The more you see somebody as being highly competent, the less likely it is that you're going to believe that person has your best interests at heart. You're more likely to think they have their own best interests at heart. And similarly, if you see somebody as, having very, very favorable intentions towards you, really your good friends, then it's less likely you'll see them as being highly competent. Now, we're quite sure why this is the case, but this is precisely what the data reveals. Now, in the financial services sector, Now, I said at the beginning that risk in vulnerability is the key. The greater is the level of risk, the greater we perceive ourselves as being vulnerable, the more important it is that trust exists before we can make a transaction. Now, of course, in the financial services industry, we are very vulnerable. And as a result, it's actually essential that we see people as having a high score on both of those domains. But in this industry, either by education or by training, we have been taught as service providers that what matters is our competence, our skills, our training, our experience, our performance, our CVs. And we're not taught that we should have positive intentions. We should convey our benevolent intentions towards our clients. And on the client side, they're also taught that what ought to be important to them is the competence of the manager. And so there's been an extreme focus on competence in this industry. And we've neglected the importance of conveying benevolent intentions. And as a result, financial service providers, bankers, brokers, advisors, asset managers are not necessarily trusted. This is not a trusted industry group. And it's precisely because we have a low score on that intentions domain. Now you can compare this to other industry groups who seem to have done a lot better. In fact, across the whole world, in fact, wherever this question has been asked about who is the most trusted professional, the one that comes out at the top of that list is firefighter. Firefighters are the most trusted professional group. And the reason is because they score highly on both of those domains. People genuinely believe that a firefighter will put themselves in harm's way in order to protect somebody else from harm. Now, what better demonstration do you have of benevolent intentions than that? And people also believe that firefighters are very skillful, very competent in this job, because we know that the training and so on that goes into qualifying for being a firefighter is very, very rigorous indeed. So they score very highly on both of those domains, and as a result, they are very much trusted. Another group which also scores very highly are doctors, not as high as firefighters, but nevertheless they score relatively highly on both of those domains. They're perceived as having their patients' best interests at heart, and they're also seen as very competent to do this job. And there is a lot of research has gone into looking at the impact of those high trust relationships to patient and doctor outcomes. Now, what we found is that if a patient trusts their doctor, one of the first things they're going to do is they're more likely to go and see the doctor when they feel sick, which means they're more likely to go and seek care when they need it. When they get to the doctor, they are more likely to disclose the kind of, sensitive information about their lifestyle, about their symptoms, the kind of information which will allow the doctor to make better diagnoses, and of course then to treat the patient better. They're more likely to follow the recommendations of the doctor, follow the treatment that the doctor sets out for them, and to stick with that treatment over its full course. And that is also something that has been shown to deliver better patient outcomes if they stick to their treatments over the full course. They're more likely to stay with that doctor over time. They're less likely to go and look for second opinions. And they're more likely to recommend that physician to others. And they're also, in America, it's been shown they're less likely to sue those doctors for malpractice if they're trusted. Now, if I replace the word doctor with asset manager and patient with fund client, then, the asset management community would leap for joy, because this is exactly what they want. They want exactly clients to come to them when they want delegated asset management, of course. They want them to follow their recommendations. They want them to stay with the manager over time and to recommend the manager to others. But, of course, the difference between the doctors and the fund managers is that the doctors are perceived as having benevolent intentions, whereas, unfortunately, asset managers aren't. So what's really missing in this industry is that we're not very good at conveying our positive intentions towards clients. In fact, we don't even see this as being something that's important.
Herman, this is a fascinating subject. So I really appreciate your time talking this through. I would recommend people get hold of a copy of your book and read it, The Trust Mandate. Where can we get hold of it, and how can we connect with you?
Well, the publisher is at Herman House, so you can get copies of the book at Herman House or at any good online or offline bookstore. You can also get in touch with me through Herman House or directly through my firm, which is Prospector. That'd be at Herman at prospector.limited, all written out in full.
Fab. We'll make sure we put the links to the book and to your contact details in the show notes for this episode. Herman, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. It's great talking to you, Martin.
A big thank you to Herman for joining me on the podcast today. Do check out his new book. It's called The Trust Mandate, the behavioural science behind how asset managers really win and keep clients. I'll put a link in the show notes for this episode, which you can find at icradio.co.uk/327. Now, I'm really pleased to share the news that Herman has agreed to speak at a conference I'm hosting and organising next year. It's a one-day conference called BAMFest, and it's taking place at the Electric Theatre in Guildford on Friday, the 21st of June, 2019. We're going to spend the day exploring the art and science of marketing for financial planners. So for any financial planners who listen to this podcast, please do take a look at the website. It's www.bamfestivity.co.uk, and you can sign up there to receive emails with details of things like ticket offers and speakers, etc. We're going to put on sale a very small batch of super early bird tickets for the conference on the 21st of June this year, so a year ahead of the conference. So please make sure you sign up at bamfestivity.co.uk and be the first to hear when those tickets go on sale. I'm sure they'll go very quickly. I'll put a link to BAMFest in the show notes for this episode too. Now, thank you for listening to this episode of Informed Choice Radio. We'll be back next Monday, and remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.